Jake Morgan lived a quiet life on the edge of the Arizona frontier. He wasn't one for big towns or noisy saloons. His land stretched far and wide, acres of dusty earth, rolling hills, and a river that cut through the wilderness like a silver thread. People called him a loner, and they weren't wrong. After losing his family to fever years ago, Jake had built his world around silence, cattle, and a rifle hanging by the door. He didn't expect anything to change. It was early evening when it happened. The sky had just started turning gold, the kind of deep, fiery hue that only the desert could produce. Jake had gone down to the river to check on his fences after a thunderstorm had rolled through the night before. The water was running high, angry and fast, swollen from the rain. He was about to turn back when he heard it. A scream. It was faint at first, muffled by the roar of the current, but then he saw her, arms flailing in the water, long black hair spread around her like seaweed, her head bobbing under again and again. Jake didn't hesitate. He dropped his hat, threw off his coat and dove straight into the current. The cold hit him like a hammer, but he powered forward. The girl was being dragged by the current toward the rocks. Her body was limp by the time he reached her. With all his strength, he grabbed her around the waist and kicked hard against the current, dragging her toward the riverbank. Every stroke felt like it might be the last, but eventually his feet found mud. He hauled her out, coughing, soaked, and shaking. She wasn't breathing. Jake rolled her onto her side, cleared her mouth, and pressed her chest. After a few seconds, that felt like forever. She coughed, water pouring from her mouth, and gasped for air. Her eyes fluttered open. They were dark, wide, and filled with fear. "You're all right now," Jake murmured, brushing wet hair from her face. She tried to speak, but no words came. He wrapped her in his coat and carried her up the hill to where his horse was tied. She was light, too light, and shivering violently. Jake lifted her onto the saddle and led the horse carefully toward the nearest trail that crossed into Apache land. He knew what tribe she belonged to. He'd seen their smoke signals often. They were peaceful now, mostly, but still proud, still bound by their old ways. It didn't take long for the tribe to appear. 10 riders came out of the trees like ghosts, silent, watchful, faces painted with earth tones. Jake stopped and raised his hands. "I found her in the river," he said simply. "She was drowning." The leader, a tall man with sharp eyes and silver feathers in his hair, rode forward. He looked at the girl, then at Jake. Jake expected suspicion, maybe even anger. But the chief only nodded. "You have done a great thing," he said in English, voice calm but firm. "You saved one of our daughters." Jake helped her down, carefully. She was still dazed. A younger woman from the group rushed to her side and took her hands. Then the chief spoke again, this time in Apache. Jake couldn't understand the words, but he felt the mood shift. Some of the riders looked at him with surprise. Others seemed almost respectful. Before Jake could ask anything, the chief said, "You will come to our village tomorrow. We must speak. There is sacred law involved." Jake blinked. "I'm sorry?" The man gave a small bow. "You will understand." Then they vanished back into the trees with the girl, leaving Jake alone by the river. That night, Jake sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the moonlight across his land. He didn't know why he felt so restless. Maybe it was her eyes, how they looked at him like he was the last thing she'd ever see. Maybe it was the chief's strange words, sacred law. What did that even mean? The next morning, as promised, a group of riders arrived at his ranch. This time they came with gifts, blankets, dried meats, and a woven necklace that the elder woman placed around Jake's neck. "You are welcome in our land," the chief said. They rode together to the Apache village, hidden deep in a canyon between red cliffs and tall pines. Children stared at him, women whispered, but no one showed hostility. Then he saw her, wrapped in a new blanket, hair neatly braided, sitting beside an elder woman by the fire. She looked better, but her eyes still carried the river inside them. The chief gathered the people and began to speak in their native tongue. Then he turned to Jake. In our tradition, he explained, when a man saves a woman from death, especially water, he becomes tied to her by sacred bond. It is law, older than memory. Jake frowned. Tied how? She now belongs to you, the chief said, as wife, as spirit bond. Jake felt like the wind had been knocked from his chest. I didn't save her for that, he said carefully. I just did what anyone would have. Not everyone would risk their life for a stranger, the chief replied. But you did. The spirits have spoken. It cannot be undone. Jake turned to the girl. What about her? Does she want this? The chief looked at her. She stood slowly, came forward, and for the first time spoke. My name is Nayeli, she said softly. I don't know why I lived, but I know the law. I will follow it. Her voice was calm, but her hands trembled. Jake didn't know what to say. He wasn't looking for a wife, and certainly not like this. He lived in silence, in solitude. What would he do with a girl who came with ghosts and sacred law? But as he looked at her, something in her eyes struck him. Not fear, not desperation. It was something else. Trust. The tribe began preparing her things. The elder woman handed Jake a pouch of tobacco and said something he didn't understand. Nayeli gathered her few belongings. Within the hour, she was sitting behind him on his horse. As they rode back to his ranch, neither of them spoke. The wind rustled through the trees, and the river whispered its secrets behind them. Jake didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing. Life on the ranch would never be the same again. The first few days with Nayeli on the ranch were quiet, awkward, like two strangers walking through fog, unsure of where they were going or how they even got there. Jake had prepared a separate room for her in the small cabin, giving her space and privacy. He didn't know what was expected of him. Was she his wife, his guest, a stranger placed in his life by fate, or a sacred law he didn't understand? Nayeli didn't complain. She rose early, helped in the kitchen, mended clothes, fed the chickens, and tended to the small garden behind the barn. She moved with grace, never wasting a single motion. Her silence wasn't cold, it was careful, like she was afraid of breaking something that had only just begun to take shape. Jake watched her from afar. One morning, he found her standing in the corral, gently stroking the nose of his most temperamental horse, a wild mustang named Shadow, who barely let anyone near him. But with her, the beast was calm, eyes soft, head low. Jake approached slowly. He don't usually let folks touch him, he said, nodding toward the horse. Nayeli didn't turn around. He has pain in his leg, old injury. Jake raised a brow. You can feel that? I can see it, she said softly, in how he leans when he breathes, in the way he shifts his weight. Jake was quiet for a moment, impressed. You've been around horses a lot, haven't you? She finally turned to face him. My father raised them. I used to ride with him before the soldiers took our land. Jake nodded slowly. He'd heard stories, the U.S. cavalry, the forced relocations, the broken promises. Her calm didn't come from safety. It came from surviving. That night, Jake set 2 plates at the table instead of 1. You don't have to stay here if you don't want to, he said as they ate in candlelight. I didn't save you to own you. Nayeli looked up, her eyes steady. In my tribe, when a life is saved by another, it is not ownership. It is a joining of spirits. It is not forced. Then why did they say you belong to me? Because they believe I was given back by the river, and you are now part of my story. Jake set down his fork. And what do you believe? She was quiet for a long time. Then, I believe I was supposed to die, but I didn't, and I wonder if it's because I was meant to find something else, or someone. Jake felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with something deeper, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. As weeks passed, the awkwardness faded. Nayeli laughed more. She sang while working. Sometimes Jake caught her humming Apache lullabies to the animals. He found himself listening for her voice each morning, waiting for her to fill the empty rooms with life. One evening, while the sun dipped below the horizon in a firestorm of orange and red, Nayeli sat on the porch, weaving a basket. Jake brought her a cup of tea and sat beside her. You ever miss your village? He asked gently. I miss the mountains, she replied, and the old stories, but not the noise. or the watching eyes? Jake chuckled. Yeah, folks can be real nosy. She looked at him then. But you are not. He shrugged, didn't want to push. I wish you would, she whispered. Jake turned to her. What do you mean? I wish you would ask me what I want. He stared at her, heart thudding. What do you want, Nayeli? She set the basket down, her hands trembling just slightly. I want to stay, she said. Not because the tribe said I must, but because here I can breathe. Jake reached for her hand. You don't have to be anyone but yourself here. Not a wife, not a duty, just Nayeli. Her fingers closed around his. I would still choose to be your wife, she said. And in that quiet moment, beneath the stars and the wide desert sky, Jake leaned forward and kissed her for the first time. Months passed. Life on the ranch changed, but not in ways that frightened Jake. In fact, everything felt more grounded, more real. Nayeli brought warmth to the home. She taught Jake Apache words. He taught her how to fix fence posts and brand cattle. The townsfolk were slow to accept her. Some gave her cold glances at the general store, whispered behind her back. But Jake didn't care. He walked beside her, proud. And eventually, some of the neighbors began to soften too, especially after she helped deliver a neighbor's baby during a storm when no doctor could make it. Word spread. The Apache woman wasn't just quiet, she was kind, capable, and brave. But trouble wasn't done with them yet. One day, a group of U.S. soldiers rode onto the ranch. Their leader demanded to see Jake. We heard there's an Apache woman living here, he said coldly. That violates treaty restrictions. Jake stepped forward. She's my wife. Not legally, the officer sneered, and she should be on the reservation. She's not property, Jake growled. She's free, and she's staying. The officer looked ready to argue, but something in Jake's stance made him think twice. He grunted, spat in the dirt, and turned his horse around. Jake turned to see Nayeli standing on the porch, clutching a small pouch. He walked up and pulled her into his arms. I'll fight for you, he whispered, every time. I know, she said, her voice steady. That's why I chose you. Years later, people would still tell the story of the rancher and the Apache woman, of how he saved her from the river, and how her tribe declared them bonded by sacred law. But what mattered most was not the law, nor the tradition. What mattered was the quiet love that grew between them, not forced, not expected, but nurtured through fire, silence, and time. Jake never called her his property. He called her his partner, his peace. His river that didn't drown him, but taught him to live again.